Welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's 1% Better. If you're a long-time listener, you would have heard episodes out in the past, interviews with folks that are big into meditation, practicing mindfulness, getting very much connected into their inner self and understanding themselves better. Big into that area, love learning a bit about it, different practices. So that's something we cover a lot. Another topic I like to cover is adventure races or running or long distance races. A couple early on, I think one about the Spine race in the UK. So both of those things I'm quite interested in and think they're both very good for the mind and the body as well if you can do it in probably right proportions. About a month or two ago, I noticed on the BBC website an article talking about a 3,100 mile race, and it linked to a meditation guru called Sri Chinmoy. I needed to find out more, so I checked in, read a bit about it, and thought, what an amazing idea, what a crazy idea, but also an interesting one. It would be pretty cool to talk to somebody that has ran in it. So I did a bit of research. Turns out there's a gentleman from Ireland. His name is Nirbhasa Magee, and he has run the race 3 times over the last 5 years. And he is big into meditation, and he is very much big into the areas of mindfulness and practicing. Heart meditation is one that we talked about during this episode, but also, as you can imagine, he's big into running and combining the two. So I was fascinated to hear this story, and it didn't disappoint. It's an interesting journey through Nirbhasa's life from the ages of late teens to early 20s when he got into meditation, and then how he combined the running and some of the practices he has. And he shares so much, very, very interesting, and you can absolutely detect from listening the level of joy and passion and fulfillment he gets from doing this. So I hope you enjoy it. Before I get into the episode, just one other thing. You might be also familiar with this Slack community, an online group that I've set up a few months back, and we do monthly challenges where we kind of hold each other accountable to stop something, start something, continue something more over the course of the month to try and improve 1% every day or even more. This month of November, that's coming up, we're trying something different. We're calling it No Insert Here November. So for me, I'm doing a no coffee November. Not looking forward to it, but I want to challenge myself and see if I can eliminate it for the month. Probably harder than giving up the booze. Others are thinking of doing something similar. One mentioned a no snooze button November. So maybe if you're interested, sign up to the group. It's free, absolutely. Just a bit of fun. We'll hold you to account and hopefully you get something from it. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can find it there, and I'll be tweeting about it and posting about it. Or it's on the website as well. Just go to the homepage and sign up. Bit of crack, and hopefully you'll get something beneficial from it. Right, that's enough. I'll hand you over to the very, very interesting Nirbhasa Magee. Enjoy. And I'm really, really excited to talk to my guest today, Nirbhasa Magee. Nirbhasa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have a fellow Irishman on the show as well, to talk about running, to talk about the areas of self-transcendence. I think will probably be the major focuses during the next while. And I guess how you came to my attention, Nirbhasa, I think it was on the BBC website. I saw an article recently about this race that is 3,100 miles long, and it's ran around a single half-mile block in New York every year, and I was instantly fascinated by it. And I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about it. As somebody that's ran it, definitely want to hear about your story there. So maybe before we dive into that, maybe give yourself an introduction, talk a bit about your own background, and certainly maybe start talking a bit about how you got connected in with the 3,100 race as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I guess where to start is always the question. Well, I guess I am Irish, but I've been living in Iceland for the last 6 years, which is a whole other story in itself as to how I got there. I guess the two things you talked about in your introduction were meditation and running, so I could talk a little bit about how I got into both of those. I was actually fortunate, like when I was going to secondary school, I had a circle of friends, and some of those friends were actually into meditation. And so then when I went to college, I always had a very positive idea about what meditation could do. But there's definitely a big difference between meditation as, that's a good idea, I must take it up sometime, and actually practicing it. And I'm actually lucky enough to be able to give meditation classes. I give in Ireland and also here in Iceland. And definitely one of the things I emphasize, I think partly from my own personal experience, is the key to a good meditation practice is actually just getting your foot in the door. Even if it's only just like 5 minutes a day of daily practice, that is like the most crucial decision you can take, because once you have that 5 minutes of meditation practice, it really is like building a daily habit. And within a couple of weeks, then it becomes almost naturally, some part of your being, begins to wonder, if you've skipped your daily meditation, what's going on? I haven't had my daily quotient of peace and joy. So you could say I took that step myself probably around the age of 20 or 21. I was in college at the time. And, it was kind of interesting. It was actually just a book one of my friends gave me. And I would read the, whatever instructions they had to offer. And I was just somehow inspired to do it. I was doing it twice a day.
What was the book? Do you remember?
I actually don't remember. Okay. It had one of these grand sounding titles, like meditate like a master within 7 days or something like this, that promises more in the title than that it actually delivers.
I have a book recommendation page on the website, so that's why I kind of ask questions around specific books, but that's no problem at all. I just thought it might stand out. Sorry for interrupting.
No worries. And I do have to credit that book with actually starting my meditation practice, even if I wasn't meditating like a master after 7 days. At least it somehow got me on the road. And so I had my own little meditation practice maybe for about a year and a half. And, I definitely felt the difference. Sometimes even if if I didn't feel I had a good meditation, I would actually still notice the difference in my day-to-day life. I was more aware. I was more peaceful. Things that would normally be like red button trigger issues were all of a sudden kind of washing off me like water off a duck's back. But somehow what I was missing, I think I was missing two things. First, you definitely get to a stage where you feel you can go higher or you can go deeper. You can have more peace, more joy. And I wasn't even able to articulate it. I didn't really even know that much about, you could say, spirituality or about, spiritual paths. But I just knew that there was somehow a deeper source or a deeper potential. I didn't even really know what I was looking for.
It was like a feeling that you were being pulled a little bit into it more?
Yeah. You could say like very naturally, some part of myself. It's almost like going to the gym. Once you've gotten to a certain stage, then there's some part of you that naturally feels, okay, I can go a little longer or I can do a little bit more. And somehow I was at a stage where, this book, it really wasn't able to take me any further. So I was really looking for something deeper. And so I went to a set of free meditation classes organized by the Sri Chinmoy Center. At that time I thought, okay, if I just had a new technique or a new, some more techniques, maybe that would do the trick. But what that class did, it actually, you could say, reunited me with the second thing I was missing. Earlier that year, I had been on the Camino de Santiago, this famous pilgrimage route. And you could say there, I definitely found some kind of sense of, the divine or God or, the universe, something that kind of worked for me, that wasn't a concept that was kind of being imposed from outside, but something I really felt was like part of my life. And so you could say for about 6 months, I existed in a situation where my meditation practice, was all about self-awareness and all about, increasing my daily awareness. And that existed in one part of my being. And then this whole sense of, you could say, God or the divine existed in another part, and going to those classes really, you could say, brought the two together. I really started, first of all, Sri Chinmoy advocates meditating on the heart center. You could say it's the place where a lot of people, when they refer to themselves, they naturally, touch their chest because they feel, you could say, a sense of their essence. So it's a very natural and powerful concentration point for meditation. So when I started meditating on the heart center, my meditations, they just took off. And I was really having experiences that I didn't think were even possible. So that actually encouraged me to, pursue, to become a part of the Sri Chinmoy Center, and to, follow that particular way of meditation.
I was just going to say, can I ask again for people listening, what did your meditation practice involve? Was it on your breath? As you said, you're focusing maybe on your heart center. Was it, maybe just talk me through the process you would go through for those meditations, even the initial ones and maybe the further
exactly.
ones?
No, that's a very, very good question. So, for example, these heart center meditations, what's actually, you could say initially, I would start with a technique, of breathing and feeling that my breath was coming from the heart and then exiting from the heart center. I would do concentration exercises on a candle and feeling the same thing, that my breath was coming from the candle into my heart center and then leaving through the heart center. And one thing I found out, there's a big difference between concentrating in the mind when you're trying to use your mental effort and concentrating in the heart. When you use a concentration technique on the heart has this quality of oneness, that it actually tries to identify with the thing that it is meditating on. So you actually feel a tremendous sense of connection and a tremendous sense of unity, not only with the thing you're meditating on, but then that actually naturally grows to expand with the universe. You find yourself coming out of meditation with much more goodwill towards people. You basically have much more, you could say, love and patience and understanding of people, even though they're still the same people with the same faults, but you're much kinder on other people and you're much kinder on yourself. And actually what happens is the techniques themselves are really only like, I always use the analogy of like a city map. When I first moved to Iceland, and I live in Reykjavik now, of course I needed, to look up the map on my phone, to figure out where I was. But then after a couple of weeks, you can actually throw away the city map. And the same with the techniques. So I had to use techniques in the beginning with heart-centered meditation. But now actually what happens when I sit down to meditate, through those techniques, you could say I got to know the city, you could say the heart city. And so you could say 9 times out of 10, I enter very easily into that heart space. And it's a space that exists in silence. So in silence, there's almost a part of you inside yourself that knows which way to go, that knows to go higher, that knows to go deeper. So I just try to follow that inner feeling. I did say 9 times out of 10, sometimes, 1 time out of 10, or, look, we all have days where we wake up and we're not in the mood. And definitely then, a technique can be quite useful to bring you back into that space. But it is you definitely feel that this part of yourself, this inner spiritual part of yourself, is a very natural part of your being. And very often it's just been waiting to be contacted and explored. And once, you could say, after a few weeks or a month or however long, it's different for different people. Then you basically naturally begin to explore that space. It becomes a part of your being.
Very, very interesting. Thanks for explaining it. If you were to look at yourself now, or a year or two into your meditations when you were making that progress, and before you got into it, would you have believed this was possible? Like when you were starting out, did you obviously go in with an open mind? What was the draw into it? What was the maybe reason you got started as well?
It's it's quite interesting, and it's also because I wasn't like I was a very unhappy person before I started meditating. I had I was studying something very interesting in college. I had friends. I had I had a lot of things to keep me going. But I guess the one thing meditation has given me, and I guess it was the thing I was looking for, even though I didn't realize it at the time, was a sense of fulfillment, a sense of And you could say it's also a sense of purpose, and not even a sense of purpose that I can, quote in 10 words, like a bumper sticker, like this is what I'm doing with my life. It's more a feeling when you get up out of bed in the morning that, there's something calling you, there's a purpose calling you, and that when you set about fulfilling that purpose, even the act of starting about doing it, gives you a tremendous sense of joy. The fact of actually doing it, and I guess that's another thing that changed. Very often I would be happy if things worked out the way I wanted them to, and then I would be sad if things didn't. But I guess what meditation has taught me to actually cherish just even the doing, like basically if you get an inner feeling, to follow something good with your life, to actually you follow that inner feeling and just get joy just from doing that thing. Very often, I have, you could say, a lot of different projects going on. Some of them work out, some of them don't, but it's the actual doing of those things that give me joy. Even with meditation, some meditation days are better than others, but there's something about just the fact of sitting down and making some time for yourself, and following that inner feeling that there's a joy that comes out of that in and of itself, regardless of the experience that you may or may not have had. So I guess in summary, it would have first of all, this feeling of purpose. And then secondly, this feeling of getting joy just from, you could say, doing the things that make you happy rather than waiting to achieve X, Y, and Z before you're happy.
Okay. Very good. Very good. So where did fitness and exercise come into the equation, I guess? And obviously that's where the running and the race could probably come up in the conversation.
Well, I have to say, before I started meditation, I did sport in college and running was part of that, and I hated it. And in fact, I would even have this technique while I was running, like absolutely the opposite of meditation. I would try and fill my mind with as many thoughts as possible to try and distract myself from the fact, that I was actually running. It wasn't actually a particularly good technique, and I still hated running as much as ever. I guess the one thing meditation taught me to do was to be in the right inner space when I'm running. You could say one of Sri Chinmoy's philosophies is if it's something positive, like music or running or creativity or whatever it is, you can really bring meditation into that. So, for example, and actually this happened very quickly after I started meditating with Sri Chinmoy. One of the people in the centre he was going to run the Dublin City Marathon, and he asked me to, well, actually he didn't originally. I think it was sort of his idea to get me to run with him. But originally he said, come on out to Marley Park and help me train. So I would start, the most I'd ever done before I started meditating with the Sri Chinmoy Centre was 5 miles. So he said, come on out and run 5 miles with me and help me train. And then, of course, the next week, 5 miles became 7 miles, 7 miles became 10 miles. And then at some point we ran a half marathon. And then the idea came to me that maybe I could actually do the marathon. But very quickly, from meditation with the Sri Chinmoy Centre, I really got into the space of actually running the right way. I would imagine that I was running along eternity's road. I feel the sense of eternity and vastness, running through nature, feeling the, tremendous peace that came from nature. And, maybe initially I would have to, you could say consciously concentrate on it, but it came very, very natural to me, and I actually began to really appreciate my running, and I actually started doing it every day. You could say just as a part of my meditation practice. Even if my meditation wasn't going that well, I was almost guaranteed 100% when I ran, I would be more tranquil, more calm, more happy person when I got back in. So it definitely became a very, very big draw for me. Now, that being said, it was many, many years before I even thought of entering into the ultra running world. My initial goal, like I said, I ran Dublin City Marathon. I ran it next year. So for the first few years, I was basically doing 1, maybe 2 marathons every day. And
every year, I would say. Not
every year. Sorry. Yeah, we haven't gotten to the race yet, but we're doing 1 or 2 marathons every day.
Oh God.
Okay, I'm still doing 1 or 2 every year. And at this stage, I was actually aware of these ultra distance races because, Sri Chinmoy actually founded them. He founded at the time we had a 6 and 10 day race that took place every April in Flushing Meadow Park. And we had this 3,100 mile race, but it was something I would hear about. I didn't even know that well the people who did them, so it was really in the realm of that's inspiring, but I couldn't ever see myself doing it anytime soon. And it was like that for many years. I never got a strong feeling to do ultra running or ultra racing at all. I think around 2008, I started doing slightly longer races, like 47-mile races, 50-mile races, that kind of thing. But really, it never entered my head to do these kind of races at all. And then what actually happened in 2012, we usually, when Sri Chinmoy was alive, he passed away in 2007, we would go and visit him every year in April and August in New York, all the students from around the world. And that's something we still do to this day, every August and every April. We all arrive together for, a program of meditation and music and running and basically everything that we do. And so that April, usually there's the 6 and 10 day race that we organize, basically starts immediately after the April celebrations. So it's basically usually the last week of April and maybe, the first few days of May. And at that time, I was working in web development, and I traveled to San Diego to work on a project. And then on the way back, I happened to stop in New York, and we had, there was a meditation taking place, which I went to. And then afterwards, somebody suggested, why don't we travel up and see the race that's going on? So I should say something about this 6 or 10 day race. So basically, it's 2 races that take place simultaneously. What happens is that the clock for the 10-day race starts, and then 4 days later, the clock for the 6-day race starts, and then they all finish at the same time. And in between that time period, the clock never stops. Now, obviously, you can take rests however much you want, you can sleep however much you want, but you have to be aware, if you want to do well, that the clock is still ticking. So obviously, sorry, go on.
So the race itself isn't a distance race. It's just how much you can do in that time, is it?
Exactly. It's the most miles you can do either in 6 days or in 10 days. And so I had never, ever even been to that race before. And by this time, I'd been a student of Sri Chinmoy's for nearly 10 years, I think. But somebody said, why don't we go up to the race? And so about that time, it was about a mile drive away in Flushing Meadow Corona Park. And we reached the race maybe about 11 o'clock at night. And so the car pulled up. And where the car pulled up, it was actually right, you could say, beside the racetrack. So when I got out of the car, I basically stepped right onto the racetrack, and there was such a tremendous feeling of peace. There were actually not that many runners out on the track, because usually around that time, let's say between, you could say 10 o'clock and 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, a lot of the runners, that's when they go to bed. But it was so peaceful, and I remember the feeling when my feet hit the ground, I immediately got this very strong inner feeling that this is something I could do. And in fact, I should maybe even try and do it next year. Now, bear in mind, I had never even ran more than 50 miles before this in one continuous go. So it's a big step between this and, let's say, running for 6 whole days and 10 whole days. One interesting thing actually that happened, and it sort of illustrates, you could say, the interplay between the mind and the heart. Very often you get a very strong inner feeling from the heart, and then the mind kind of comes in and is a little bit scared, So immediately I get this very strong inner feeling, but then my mind comes, yeah, but
gives you all the reasons not to do something. Yeah,
exactly. So it sort of kind of tries to force a little bit of compromise, or tries to limit. Very often the mind, especially this hesitating mind, can be quite limiting. So I said, okay, fine, 6 days. And so then I actually, I started training. Thankfully I had a whole year in which to, go from, you could say, 50 miles to a state where I could actually do 6 days. And of course, my first goal was a 24-hour race held in London. So I trained for that and I did it. And then I was training, like I was still living in Dublin at the time. And very often, one thing I found worked for me, because at the time I was doing a lot of computer related work. I was self-employed. And one thing I found from the running that my brain would get quite spacey after a very long run. So what I ended up doing was actually doing all my running late at night so I could get a good night's sleep before I started again. And I had two very interesting experiences, even from the training. The training itself was a very, you could say, spiritually rewarding experience. At the beginning, I wasn't actually doing as much training as you could say I would do now for one of these big races. Every day I would try and do between an hour and a half. And then I would try and do at the weekend kind of long runs back to back, Saturday and Sunday. So I would start with 4 hours Saturday, 4 hours Sunday, the next week, 5 hours Saturday, 5 hours Sunday, maybe take a break, and so on until I was doing, 6.5, 7 hours Saturday and 6.5, 7 hours Sunday, somehow trying to get a sense of the actual race, the way the race would be, where, you basically, as soon as you get up, you're back out the door again on the road. And I had two very interesting experiences, from the training, and also just from the lead up to the race. The first experience actually happened not during training, but happened during a meditation class. So I was given a meditation class, and actually during the meditation class, I showed a very nice documentary called, it's actually available to watch, on Vimeo. It's called Spirit of a Runner. So it's a half an hour documentary, I think that was done in 2008 about the race. And the people that came to the meditation class were, asking all kinds of questions. So you could say I was very much in that race atmosphere. And then I woke up the next day, and during my morning meditation, that's the other thing. During the meditation class, people were talking about, what an amazing inner experience it was. And then during my morning meditation the next day, I got this, you could say again, this inner voice saying, well, if it's going to be such a profound inner experience, why not do it for 10 days instead of 6 days? So I ended up changing my registration from the 6-day race to the 10-day race. And then the second thing that happened was that obviously I had to try and combine my training with my, my day-to-day work. And it just so happened that before I went to New York, I think I had 3 very big projects to finish. And mentally, I just couldn't imagine how these projects were going to happen. And I should say that maybe about 5 years earlier, I was profoundly moved by a talk I heard by one of Sri Chinmoy's students, actually in London. And she was talking about, she actually works very hard. She works she basically has a music school for Londoners from a low-income background. And, she works very hard to try and, raise the money, charitable donations for the school to keep the school running. And I think even a couple of years ago, she got awarded an MBE for her services. But at the time, she got up and just gave a talk about her meditation life, because she's been meditating ever since she was a little girl. And she said something very interesting, which really struck me. She said, it's got to the stage where I just sort of exist, and all of these things happen around me. And I found that somehow very remarkable. I didn't quite know what it meant at the time, or how that's possible, because I knew how hard she worked, and I knew how hard it was, to keep something like that up and running. So it's one of those things that sounded extremely intriguing, but at the same time, I didn't quite know what it meant. But then when I started training, I said to myself, I'm going to make the commitment that no matter what happens with these jobs, my training is going to come first and forward in my life. And so no matter what I did, I always did my daily training. And then what actually happened, I actually began to realize what she was actually talking about. By putting, the important things first, everything else sort of not quite finished themselves, but it really was almost like that, and it almost became like I was an observer just watching you could say I was in my heart or in my soul, and it's like my soul was like just watching all of these things happening. Like I was still working like crazy. I was doing everything, but some part of me was at the same time extraordinarily detached and peaceful from the whole process. And, that I wasn't identified or stressed about anything, that I was almost like just watching the whole thing happen, so that was a very, profound experience that came directly from the training.
Okay, so there's almost an element of self-transcendence in that in itself, right? That you're
exactly.
You would hear, and I would try and advocate in my own day-to-day work and advocate to others that people sometimes are stressing a lot over a project, over a deadline or whatever. But if you just kind of say, look, you've got to this point in your life, and all of those things you've stressed about in the past haven't really mattered that much because you're here now and you've been successful. So it's, obviously it's just probably a different angle or metaphor for that perhaps, but we do get caught up on our own head. So it's fascinating that through this experience, through this training, through the practice, you're able to switch off effectively and let all these things happen, but still be, I think sometimes what I hear as well, and I'm kind of going in tangents, but you hear about people meditating or practicing that heavily, and the thought might be, they'll lose their edge, or they won't be as dedicated or focused on what they need to do work-wise. But, maybe when you do it and you're practicing so much and so well trained from that perspective, you still have that edge. It's just you don't allow yourself to get stressed, and a lot of times you see people getting stressed, and that's not going to help things.
Yeah, but exactly.
There's almost an impression if you're not stressed, you're not working hard enough.
It's true, right? It's absolutely true. I think also there's a misconception, and again, a little bit partly based in, you could say, ancient truth, is that meditation is somehow people feel that meditation is somehow a way of not accepting life responsibilities, a way of escaping from the world and going off into the moon world. And there was a certain extent in the ancient past to which that was true, I mean, people really did advocate, the world is just so full of, suffering and so we have to go away to some remote mountain hideout. But I think definitely most meditation teachers, today would advocate that you have to live your life. You have to accept your life. You have to love life. And if you're going to practice meditation, it has to be with a view to cultivating the qualities you need to stay in the world and to be happy. Meditation should really be all about, giving you what you need to be able to do everything, that you need to do, but at the same time, still have this very deep inner core of peace and satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good. Just one question kind of around the training, the physical elements of that. Like, were you lucky to be not picking up injuries? Did you balance your training because I've done marathons as well, and obviously marathons not like ultras, but my back would start breaking down and I'd have issues, and I'd have to kind of implement a lot more kind of stretching and maintenance type work to keep my body in shape and not, completely quit the whole running escapade. But how did you approach that, or were you lucky to just keep running?
I think there's two aspects to it. And number one, I do believe I have been very lucky, like I'm about to mention number two, but I'm not sure whether, it's enough to account for number one, in that I have been, very lucky. I mean, I definitely, have gotten injured, but it's never to the point where it's irrevocable. I've always, even if it's during a race or if it's, I've always been able to find some kind of workaround or some kind of, way to keep going. But number two, and like I said, it may have a lot to do with number one, and it may explain a lot of number one. I definitely believe the attitude to which you start training and to which you start running, is very, very important. I definitely, if you're not running for the right reasons, you're definitely much more likely to get injured or to push too hard. If you're running from a sense of whatever it is, to prove something to somebody, to prove something to yourself. There's so many different reasons or different, you could say, mental attitudes, which you can have, and I see it a lot actually when I'm in the middle of one of these big races, that somehow I almost can't articulate it. I can't articulate it in a sense that, that person is having that injury because he's suffering from this mental issue. But you do definitely perceive some link between people's mental state and, the injuries that they suffer. A very obvious case is when people try to do things, like with pride or with ego or, I'm going to, I'm going to beat this guy or what, and they end up pushing too hard and they end up getting injured that way. You could say that's, very much the most obvious case, but you definitely do see, a relationship between, you could say, mental blockages and physical injuries. And definitely when I run, I very much try to be free of all that. I very much try to have the right attitude. If I don't, you could say very often you'll get that right attitude from within. But very often if I'm in a stage where whatever, my mind is going and I'm not able to reach that inner space, you could say I try and pray to have the right attitude, whatever that right attitude is. I try to actually have a very childlike consciousness when I'm running, to try and run basically like a 7-year-old boy running through the back, a gardener running around the streets, if you just have this joy of movement, have this joy of, because at the end of the day, that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to have more joy in my life, to have more spiritual progress in my life. So I definitely think, as well as being, quite fulfilling, that has played a huge role in my life, helping to ward off injuries over the years.
When you are running, you're paying attention to what's coming up. So if you do get if you're feeling pain or if you're getting a sense of something's not right, I think you said you kind of, how do you address that in your mind, in your meditation as you run? And do you sometimes say, look, I do need to stop today because I need to just allow this pass or whatever? Just interested on that.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very good question. And again, you could say it's very much an inner question. Some of it is experience. You just know from, once the more races you do, the more you know what's serious and what's not. So some of it is definitely life experience, but then some of it is definitely, you begin to learn between this inner voice, telling you, when you've reached your limit, and you could say the mind's hesitations and the mind's doubts, whether the mind is really just looking for an excuse to stop. Yeah. And at the beginning, when you start, it's not that easy, to be able to tell between one and the other. But definitely, the more you run, the more you're able to differentiate those two voices, because it's also definitely important to know your limits. And know at what point you can't push beyond. And so, I think definitely meditation and the inner voice definitely helps you to do that. You really do. You do get a very strong inner sense of when you can go and when you have to take it a little bit easy.
Okay, very, very good. So just to maybe finish on the 10-mile race you've signed up for, or sorry, the 10-day race. Yeah. You signed up for that. How did that experience go for you? The first time you did it?
Yeah, exactly. So that was 2013 when I first did it, and I have to say it was quite a revelation. When you start these races, everybody tells you two things you have to remember is, number one, don't go too fast on the first day, and number two, your goal is really just to finish. And then a good friend of mine who had actually done this 3,100 mile race, he was giving me a little bit of advice, and he said, for you, I think a good goal, beyond those first two goals is maybe like 500 miles. That's 50 miles a day for the 10 days. It's a modest goal, but it's a good one. Obviously do these first two ones, and then, if you can reach 500 miles, that's a pretty good goal. So I really wasn't, thinking too much beyond that, so I did look after myself on the first day, and I was expecting, I heard a lot of stories from a lot of the, could say, participants. They'll run quite fast the first day, they'll run a little bit slower on the second day, and then by the third day, they are reduced to walking. And I fully expected to be one of that number, and actually on the second day, I passed by Deepali Cunningham, who's actually the world record holder, the women's world record holder for 6 days. And so she runs the 6-day race, or at least until quite recently, she would have run it every year for like 25 years. So she's a real veteran of the race. And, of course, she's like checking in, on the new people and, how's it going? And I said, fine, I'm still running. And, but obviously, by the third day, we'll see what happens. I fully expect to be slowing down, same as everybody else. And she kind of looks at me and goes, let's see about that. I'm not too sure about that. And I guess she's seen a lot of runners, so maybe she knew something I didn't. But actually, it was true. On the third day, I was able to keep running. On the fourth day, I was able to keep running. And I was so happy and grateful to be able to keep running when everybody else was around me was, slowed down to a walk. So that in itself was a really a beautiful experience of gratitude, just to be able to keep running. What's actually interesting, during that first race, I got 2 or 3, you could say, like really like cosmic experiences, which I've actually never gotten in any subsequent race. I definitely do have spiritual experiences in all the races I run, but this kind of like cosmic blowout, like, whoa, dude, kind of experience, I at least 2 or 3 points during this race I got, which was just unbelievable. And then on the last day, I actually was doing, I was definitely doing more than, 50 miles a day. In fact, it was close to 60 miles. And at some point, actually, another one of the race veterans said, I remember, we'd basically run all night the last day. And so I had this idea that that's basically what everybody did. They just ran all night on the last day, and then the finish is at 12 midday the next day. So that's actually what I did. And I ended up doing something like 90 or 91 miles on the last day. And I did 622 miles in total, and finishing in 4th place. And then later on, I actually found out, that a lot of the runners didn't. They actually just went to their tents, like normal on the last day. But it's kind of funny, when you get this mental idea that, okay, that's what everybody does.
Yeah.
You just end up doing it, whereas, so it's very interesting how the mind, when it lets you do something and it doesn't stand in your way, like how very our physical reactions are shaped by, our mental attitude.
Absolutely. It goes back to what you said, and what I find comes up a lot in these conversations with guests, and what I do kind of myself in coaching is limiting beliefs. And when you put those kind of lids on what you think you're capable of, that's all you're capable of. But when you remove it or are told something different, your mind expands to that capacity. It's fascinating how that works, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, meditation, very often it's about unlearning, a lot of the limiting beliefs that you've basically picked up over the years, and learning to have more faith in yourself and more faith in, you could say, your soul or whatever. Yeah.
Very good. So to go from the 10-day to the 3100, I'd love to hear about, your suppose, what you decided, how to go for that for the first time, and maybe a brief overview of your experience of that. Yeah.
Well, from that first 10-day, the race organizers of the 3100 mile race, they don't just accept basically anybody that walks in the door. You have to have some previous ultra running pedigree. And one, you could say, informal rule of thumb that they use, deciding who is eligible and who isn't, is actually the performance during the 10-day. They basically say if you run 60 miles a day for 10 days, then, that's a good informal qualifying mark. And so obviously in running 622 miles, I basically crossed that qualifying threshold. So that's the first time, that it actually occurred to me to even do that race. And it kind of, I kind of put the question off for a long time because it's scary. A race of that magnitude is really, quite a scary thing.
And just to be clear, just so I can you have 52 days to complete the 3100, right? And effectively, exactly. you're running from 6 a.m. to midnight every day is the kind of the time that you're allowed to run, I guess.
Yes, exactly. So on average, you have to do roughly 60 miles a day in order to be able to finish within the cutoff. So that's why they used, the 10-day performance of 60 miles a day as a rough guide as to who's allowed to, or who's eligible to enter. So obviously I'd passed that eligibility threshold, but for a long time, that year I just kind of kicked the decision into touch. But then around Christmas time, that's usually around the time when people apply for the race. And so I was really wondering what to do. And you could say searching inwardly for, is this the right thing for me? And I actually got a very interesting experience in my meditation. Again, this feeling like, look, you're worrying too hard. Just don't worry about it. It's almost like this, you could say this inner command. You're worrying too much about it. You're putting too much, just stop worrying about it. So right there and then I just said, okay, I'm going to stop worrying about it. And then it just sort of transpired that maybe about a couple of weeks later, a good friend of mine encouraged me to call the race director, hash it out with him. And what he said was, when I called the race director, he was very nice. And he said, well, look, if you really want to do it, we'll squeeze you in. But if you want my personal advice, I would train really hard this year and I would try and do it next year. And as soon as he said it, I knew that was the right thing to do. So I actually reapplied for the 10-day race. And I was really glad I did, because then the second 10-day race, I ended up doing 702 miles, which is, you could say, 70 miles a day. So that gave me a lot of confidence. A lot of, you could say, training, as I was about to find out, a lot of training for 3100 is really just to give your mind confidence, so you can show up at the start line, and not be too scared about what's actually going to happen. So once I had achieved that 10-day result, then I knew I was ready for the 3100. So I did that 10-day race in 2014, and then in 2015 in June, that's when I did my first 3100 mile race.
Mm. And just in, I suppose, in a kind of a broader sense, that example you've used there, where you're ruminating over a decision and you tend to be overthinking it. We all probably are guilty of doing that. When you're putting that kind of question out there in your meditation, is that a typical practice that you do? If there's something on your mind, is it something you kind of say, right, I'm putting it there, and I'm leaving myself open for guidance and for something to kind of influence you? Is that one of the other benefits, I suppose, you have from the meditation practice?
Yeah, definitely. I'm really glad you actually asked that, because it's definitely something you could say that is more and more a theme of my life. Whenever I have some major crossroads or some major decision, very often, I sometimes I'll even write a letter, you could say, to God or my soul, or I basically say, okay, this is this is basically the issue at hand. These are the facts. I'll sign my name, I'll fold it up, I'll put it on my meditation shrine, and I'll meditate for 10 or 15 minutes, and I'll consciously, you could say, really consciously leave that decision, to God, to my soul, to the universe to sort out. And I found that practice, to be enormously helpful in dealing with all the different things that I have to, we all have, different questions, different, stresses and strains in our life. I've definitely found that to be extremely useful over the years, and an extremely good alternative to stressing and worrying about it.
Yeah, very interesting. And just trust what comes back or what comes up or whatever interventions, I suppose, that come in.
Exactly.
like that call to the race director, where maybe it's not normal for him to say no, not this year, next year, but whatever way that transpired was obviously the right thing.
Exactly. It's a very gradual process. Definitely for me, it's taking quite a few years to build up, and it's, there's still times when I'm doing this practice, but there's part of me wondering, oh God, what if this happens or what if that happens? I guess it's this notion of like spiritual surrender, just being able to leave, everything, to the higher forces. And that's definitely an evolving and ongoing process, so it's definitely not something that happens overnight. It happens. I guess the more inner experiences you get, the more experiences you have where, everything does turn out for the best, that just increases your confidence. So it's definitely something that's grown over the years.
Yeah, and your trust, I suppose, trust levels kind of grow over time.
Yeah, exactly.
The 3100, your first escapade with that, I don't know if that's the right word, your first attempt. Maybe just talk a little bit about that. And obviously, there's a documentary, 3100 Run and Become, is something that I would recommend folks to check out. I'll definitely share links to it afterwards. I really enjoyed watching it there. I was on holidays recently and we sat down to watch it, and it obviously not just about the 3100. It's about, I think it talks about, it goes into a run from in Navajo, and there's also another one which I had never heard of before, the one from Japan, the Gyoman-san, is it? That's
the running monks.
It's 1,000 day, I think, is it? Something?
Yes, exactly. It's an ancient Buddhist tradition, these running monks. And when they run, the ancient Buddhist tradition dictates, that if they give up, they essentially, have to commit suicide. I mean, I don't think it's ever actually happened, but it definitely gives the whole process a sense of urgency. What's very interesting about that particular film is a lot of those cultures, like the other culture that's explored is the Botswana, the Khoisan, the Bushmen. The
San Bushmen, yeah.
The director was able to get access to both, like in Botswana and Japan, that really had been very rarely granted to anybody, basically because he's also a spiritual person. So they understood, that he was coming from a spiritual background, and he was able to get, that particular access to explore those cultures. So the documentary, you could say, is really an exploration of why people run, and why they run, the spiritual benefits of running and long distance running. And so, from these 4 different backgrounds and 4 different cultures, you really realize, that this culture of ultra distance running and spirituality and the mingling of the two, is actually quite a universal a thing that's been practiced for, many hundreds and thousands of years. Yeah, so it's also, I mean, I shouldn't say this because I'm also briefly in the documentary, but I found it very, very moving, when I watched it for the first time. It's really something, that really at the very end, you're sitting there just realizing how moved you are. The film, for me, it was a very moving experience more than anything else.
Yeah, no, it was a very well put together documentary. I was glad to have watched it. Maybe just tell me about your experience. So doing the 3100, obviously that's how many? What is it? 4 times the amount, or 3.5 times, 4 times plus the amount of what you would have ran before
at the 10-day.
Yeah, for 53 days in New York in stifling heat a lot of the time. And I suppose that the idea behind the run is self-transcendence, and maybe is there some experiences you've had during it that got you to that place, whatever that looks like?
Right, exactly. So when I started it, I guess, what's at the very beginning, and I guess with every race, I always start to, you always start a little bit slow. I mean, the last thing you want to do is get injured on the very first day or the very first few days and be carrying that injury around for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And I guess so I've done the race 3 times so far, in 2015, 2017, 2019, this year. And the thing I found is that, first of all, the physical body it takes some time to adjust. So that usually happens in the first few days. So there's a process of physical adjustment. And then next comes, you could say, the mental and emotional adjustment. There comes a point at which you've realized, you've been out in the course for 7, 8, 9 days, but you've still got about 35 more days to go. So there's there's definitely a process of mental adjustment, emotional adjustment, after which, the mind starts to go. And, I shouldn't say the mind starts to go, but the mind definitely starts to quieten down. And that part of you that's resisting the whole experience begins to fade away. And you enter into a very natural state of meditation. It's actually something that every year I do, it becomes much deeper and much more natural. Like, I don't need to force it. I actually, I do have, you could say, meditation practices I do while I'm there, but somehow, they become very easy to do. Like, some part of me is, Sri Chinmoy used to say that very advanced yogis, they get to a stage where, when they're chanting mantras, that some part of their being or some part of their body automatically starts, chanting the mantras, even if their mind isn't consciously aware of it. And I'm definitely nowhere near that stage. I wouldn't claim to be advanced at all, but there are definitely stages during the race where you just feel, you're spontaneously meditating, you're spontaneously chanting these mantras. Some part of your being is really, even if your physical body is tired or whatever it is, there's some part of your being that is absolutely having the time of its life. And, I have to say I guess that's what keeps me coming back, to do these races every year. First of all, because of that experience, but also because that experience seems to get deeper every year. And, you're sort of wondering, wow, can it actually get deeper? So you basically show up the next year to find out,
It's interesting. Just one thing that triggers for me there now, I have never done this. I at some point in my life would like to do like a 10-day silent retreat, and from what I hear of people going to those, day 3, 4, those are the hardest days of it, because your brain is still kind of jumping around the place. But once you get past the day 5 or so, it seems as if things starting to quieten down, and you get to that place that you've kind of just talked about after X amount of days running. The mind just starts to drop a lot of the kind of stuff that's going on. It's just an interesting kind of parallel to what you mentioned there.
Right, exactly. One good thing I should say about the race, at least for me, is that I should say it's actually, I consider it to be a very safe space for spiritual transformation. And what I mean by that is, you're in an atmosphere where basically all the food is laid on. You have a race doctor, you have a whole support crew of cooks and counters and people looking after your well-being. So, you never really feel like you're in danger at any point. And in fact, you could say, for me, the environment might even be a little bit safer than, let's say, going on a 10-day meditation retreat. Because, with the, you could say, for meditating for many hours and being silent for many hours, obviously you can't let off any steam, you can't talk to anybody, you can't, and, definitely, if you're not experienced with meditation, there definitely is a danger of, being mentally unbalanced from doing too much meditation too soon. But the nice thing about the race is that when you're running, like I have, this year I had 3, you could say, personal helpers that helped me at various stages during the race. You have the doctor, you've basically people you can share your experiences with, that share your frustrations with. You can basically get these things out of your system, if they need to be gotten out, rather than kind of keeping it locked inside. So I've always considered, it's kind of very interesting because, again, a lot of people ask me, is it not very dangerous or is it not? But I've always considered it quite the opposite, to be something very, safe and nurturing, that basically, I can do, my spiritual practices in a very protected space.
And from watching the documentary, the race director really has the final say on who continues and who doesn't. So if he sees somebody struggling, he can pull them, right, if they're in danger.
Yeah, exactly. And usually they very much err on the side of caution when it comes to that. But we do have, there's a medical staff there. And also one of the things I should also say about the race, I guess a continuation of what I was talking about, because there's so many people there that are dedicated, to your well-being. There's a tremendous atmosphere of, like, a very family atmosphere. They all, the people around the race almost become like members of your family. You really feel, they just want to do everything for you. They, whatever it is, they'll do. People show up at the course with gifts and sweets and, food and, like helpers. Like, for example, one of my helpers would basically be there at the course from something like 10 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock at night, and you really feel it, and it's incredibly moving, that all these people are putting so much effort and energy, just making sure you're okay. And it goes a long way to alleviating any, issues that you might be going through at the moment. And in fact, what it actually does is it makes you feel that you're actually not doing it by yourself and you're not stuck out there in the course all alone. That somehow we're all doing it together. Like, even the other runners, I mean, it is a race. There is a first, second and third. But the extent to which all the runners help each other and the extent to which, like, our support crew help, I think that's another thing which, brings me back to the race every year. I mean, I've really never seen an atmosphere that's so, you could say, dedicated to everybody helping each other, to everybody, treating each other like brothers and sisters. It's almost like a microcosm of the way the world should be. And then when you leave the race, you actually become more and more, you become like determined to play your own small little role in actually, making the world like that. Whatever you can do to make, the world that we live in now more like that world, where everybody loves each other, respects each other, and, tries to help each other as best we can.
No, you get a sense of that certainly from the documentary as well, and going through those emotions and through such a period of time, definitely you can see everybody helping out for sure. Just maybe conscious of time as well, and I do want to leave teasers here for people to explore more about it and watch the documentary. From your 3 races, what's the kind of major standout from them? Is there any one experience that stands out when you think about the 3 of them?
That's a good question. I don't think there's any. Like I said, I had all my cosmic blowout experiences in the first 10-day race.
That was your peak. It's all downhill from there.
Yeah, it's been all downhill from there. Exactly. Actually, yeah, it's been. I guess it's been. I mean, I've had so many experiences. I think it would be unfair to mention like a standout experience. But I could maybe just kind of pick 1 or 2, even from the most recent race. Yeah, one actually a very interesting thing that happened in this year's race was that I was running very well for the first 35 days, for the first 5 weeks. There was no drama, no incident. My mileage was very regular and my mileage was very steady. And then in late July, they basically had a heat wave over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, which was the worst basically weekend they've had in 7 years. So the temperature was something like 38 degrees. And then with the humidity, you could say the actual heat index was something like 41 or 42. And again, we were talking about life experience earlier on. I'd never actually run in that kind of heat wave before, and everybody was, say, okay, be careful, slow down, sacrifice the miles, and I thought I knew what they were talking about. So like let's say on the very first day of that heat wave, I was running and I was really trying to, make sure that everything was okay. And, but I actually still ended up doing my regular mileage. I just didn't see any reason to stop. But then actually when I finished the race, I was so exhausted. Or when I finished the race that day, on the Saturday, like even, trying to get to bed or the shower, I just couldn't even think about what to do next. And I just, I said to my assistant who was helping me get to bed, look, just skip all the different steps that we take, massage, whatever it is, we're just going to bed, and then so the next day, I got up and I said, okay, we're not going to do that again. We're going to take extra breaks. We're going to be super careful. But whatever it was, I ended up getting, and it probably started a little bit on that Saturday, but heat exhaustion, where you feel very dizzy, like inside your stomach. It's kind of interesting. It's not a head dizziness; it's like a stomach dizziness. And so for the next 2 weeks up until the finish, I'd say there were at least like 6 or 7 days where I was walking either all day or part of the day. And that was a very interesting experience on two levels. Like, first of all, to just learn how to be happy no matter how well you're doing. So it was a real joy, actually just to walk. You couldn't run, you couldn't, and still learn that you could still be happy. Because we all have that, even in real life. You could say with the things we want to do, some days we're going faster, some days we're going slower, but you can still be happy no matter what. So that what actually ended up, you could say, being outwardly not a very nice experience, actually ended up being a very like interesting and beautiful experience. And then the second thing what actually happened was we had a second heat wave, like not as big as the first, but maybe the temperatures were something like 35 again, and then the humidity index maybe 38 or 39. And so that lasted for 3 days. And on the third day, I already by 10 o'clock in the morning, I got to the stage where, I felt this dizziness coming on and I had to start walking, and I was like, oh God, and then, and it's kind of interesting, because again, the mind a little bit gets locked into a solution or decision. It basically thinks, oh, well, that's it, I'm going to be walking for the rest of the day. But for some reason, a friend of mine called a doctor who's into this ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine, and I got on the phone and I talked directly to him, and he recommended the strangest thing. He basically recommended that I get some grass, like maybe about a handful of grass, and I put it basically underneath the arch of my foot, in between the sock. And he said, you do that. And then he also recommended some buttermilk spiced with cumin to line my stomach. And he said if I did both of those things, I would be running within the next hour, which I found like, wow. Right. But I ended up doing both of those things. And guess what? He was right. I actually started running, within the next hour, and, from going from a situation where I was settled. I was basically I was walking for the whole day and I couldn't see a way out of it, to being running, was really quite a remarkable experience for me. I mean, I still don't really know what effect the grass actually has. I did read some article actually about climate change in the effects of climate change in America, and they were talking, I think Tucson, where they have something like 100 days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And for some reason, one statistic from that article plopped out at me was that, like, on concrete, they measured the temperature on concrete was 112 Fahrenheit one morning, asphalt 109, but grass was only 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And that may have something to do with it. But, you know,
some sort of cooling effect or something like that on it.
Yeah, it may be something like that. But whatever it was, I mean, it was really just, you could say, just even for the mind, you know, because the mind had so decided that it was going to walk. You know, it was really just a little lesson, you know, not to rule out anything, and just whatever it is, you know, don't give up, you know, and explore all the possibilities. So I guess those are two little experiences I had from this last race. I mean, I could mention hundreds of them, but I guess, you know, those two give you an idea.
Okay, very good. Well, Nirbhasa, look, it was fascinating to hear your story in meditation, how you've kind of got into the whole area of meditation and running in the areas with Sri Chinmoy. Maybe tell us, just to kind of wrap up, you know, what you're currently doing now, what's your plans for the future, how folks can maybe learn a little bit more about Sri Chinmoy, the meditation centre, any ways they could follow up and get in touch perhaps.
Right, okay. That's a good question. So I guess what I'm doing, I'm actually kind of in between things right now at the moment. I actually worked for 6 years as a care assistant. I moved to Iceland in late 2013 because a good friend of mine who actually was running the Sri Chinmoy Meditation Center in Iceland, he was living with motor neuron disease for many years. And so it got to a stage where he needed assistance with all the various tasks. So he basically asked me, could I come? And at that time I was in between jobs, so I was very happy to do it. And that was a very fulfilling and rewarding experience, because he himself had been meditating for many, many years, you know, and he really had such a tremendous attitude. You know, first of all, you know, he really, like, in his face and in his countenance, you know, he was so peaceful. He really embodied what spirituality was all about. Actually, one interesting video, and it was actually done by the same director who did the 3,100 mile run and become. He did a short 10-minute video about my friend that featured in the Reykjavik International Film Festival. So the film is called Seeker. And actually my friend's name is Snatak, Snatak. So if you put like Snatak and Seeker, you know, probably the video will, certainly the video will come up.
Okay.
So that's definitely an interesting 10-minute video to watch. So I basically did that until August, or actually I left for the race in June, and then I actually, you know, after the race, before I could meet him again, you know, my friend actually passed away. But he, you know, it was actually very beautiful. We had a very beautiful memorial ceremony in New York, and then also in Iceland. We had a very beautiful funeral, which was very, you know, incredibly spiritual, and we really feel in some way he's still with us. So right now I'm still in Iceland, you know, and I guess seeing what's next. One thing that's definitely changed this year between, like, every year I would do the race, and I really didn't know whether I was going to do it again. Again, it's the mind hesitancy, the mind's, but actually this year when I finished the race, for the first time, I really felt, you know what? This is something I could do every year, you know, so I really wouldn't be surprised if 2020 you see me at the starting line at the race again. I really hope I can make it. As regards to how people, you know, could find out about Sri Chinmoy, we actually do a lot of events for the public, specifically in Dublin. So probably the best way that people could find out is by going to dublinmeditation.org. And then they can find out, you know, what the latest events. We organise classes, we organise concerts. We actually have a 2-mile fun run, just informal fun run every morning in the Phoenix Park where a few of us come. So if you'd like to show for that, you're very welcome to go to the website and ring the number there. So that's definitely, the best way to find out about the Sri Chinmoy Centre here in Ireland and what we do.
Okay, very good. I'll definitely include that in there. And obviously there's Sri Chinmoy centres all over the world, right? So there's folks that can check it out in their different countries.
Exactly. We have centres in about 50 countries all over the world.
Wow, okay, very good. It was great to hear the story, Nirbhasa, and great to hear so much good has come out of it for you. Definitely get a good sense from you that you're very fulfilled from it. You're in a happy place, which is exactly where we all should be, I guess. And no matter how you get there, different ways, and this is certainly one potential way. So hopefully other folks listening, check out the documentary, maybe do further investigations. And I think just the last one on the 3,100 mile race, typically every year there's only, how many people start it? Maybe 20 or something or so, is it?
No, not even that. I think the most that's ever done it in any one year is 15. So it usually varies between 14 people do it every year. So it's there's not crowds at the starting line. They don't have to separate them into waves like they do at the marathon.
But is there a limit to how many are allowed start or register? Is it?
That's actually a good question. Theoretically, no. I think if from a practical level, if any more than 15 would do it, we definitely have to, the race organisers would have to increase the infrastructure, because one thing we really want to do, if somebody's, I think the philosophy is if somebody is brave enough and is willing enough to put their feet on the starting line, then they definitely want to look after them as best they can and make sure, that all their services are at their disposal. But, theoretically, I don't think there's a limit.
Okay, very good. Well, look, again, great to chat to you. Thanks so much for this. I'm looking forward to sharing this with my listeners, and again, hopefully somebody or some folks will find it very interesting and do further follow-ups.
Oh, thank you. I have to say, talking about it, just gives me like so much joy, so I'm really very grateful, that, we've had the conversation and you've given me the opportunity, because it's almost, sometimes when you talk about these experiences, it's almost like you're reliving them. And, it just gives you such a great feeling. So I'm very grateful to you.
No, thank you so much for taking the time to do it. I really appreciate it. So this is the outro of the podcast, guys. You got to the end, and that is great. Please hang in here for another couple of minutes. I know most people won't, but maybe there's something here of interest. So check this out. First off, thanks so much for listening to this one, as well as maybe the 100 or so that's gone before it. Why not check them out if you haven't already? There's lots of good stuff in there. The whole podcasting journey for me has been a huge learning, and I'm trying to help you guys learn and improve as well. So much has changed over the last few years since I started it. I've really realised lots of the goals that I put out there, and then realised so many unexpected benefits as well. And I think anytime you take on action towards a goal, you're going to pick up lots of things that you didn't expect along the way, and hopefully they're good things. In this particular episode, was there any one or two things that jumped out? Maybe you could take a pen and paper out right now, because this is something that you might think of during the episode but never do. Do it now. Take it out. Write down a goal that you're going to set yourself as a result of something you learned from this episode. Put a plan in place and then work towards it, applying yourself deliberately over time. Take ownership, build a habit, improve, get 1% better, share accountability with somebody you know in a buddy system, and learn and grow and improve. That's what it's all about. That's my hopefully inspirational piece done. Other areas to note, check out the website robofthegreen.ie. You can consume everything there for free. There is obviously the podcast, there's video, 1 Minute Monday clips, there's articles, not enough, but I'd like to put more there. If you're interested in putting one there, let me know. And there's a Get Better app page, which I'm starting to add new content to over time. There's a feedback page if you want to email me, rob@robofthegreen.ie instead. But it's all about trying to engage you and get you to a place of improvement. So I'm open to feedback. As I said, ways you can help me is by following me on the socials. @robofthegreen.ie is the website, or @robofthegreen on all the social platforms. Subscribe to the podcast on any of the apps that you might listen to it on. Talk about it, tell a friend about it, tell your family members about it, share some of the ideas, not only to your friends, but to me. Is there anything I can improve upon? Sign up to the newsletter, that's there as well. I'm experimenting again with a group called Slack, Rob of the Green on Slack. This is really for a shared accountability environment and sharing ideas. You can sign up to that on the website as well. All of this is obviously all free, but there is also an option where you could subscribe to my Patreon site and make a small donation for the content that we do. It's there. It's totally up to you. Everything that is coming in through that or could come in through that will go into making the podcast better. So, to close, I am always trying to improve and get better. Change is difficult, I know that, but it's all about taking the first step. Learning something, applying yourself, moving forward. You can do this. I've been able to improve, pushing myself outside the comfort zone, learning, and I think if I can do it, so can you. Don't overreach, don't set yourself unrealistic goals. 1% at a time is enough, but it's all about starting, and that will bring you on your pursuit of betterness to a great place. Thanks for sticking to the very end. Talk to you next time and take care. Good luck.